What's up, guys? I'm Mike Lowe. We're here in College Football 26, and it's time. I've been asked a lot. We're going to go over the most realistic head coaching jobs, and no, Ohio State is not one of them, for your dynasty. All of the teams and rosters that we're looking at today are using the start of the season updated roster. That's the best place to start, in my opinion, because that's where your career is going to start. Now, the way I go about this, I look for what would be the most realistic situations that you could put yourself in, and then I try to give you some options because then you can kind of pick like how good or bad of a team that maybe you'd consider yourself being hired based on either your own fictional story, maybe your real life coaching experience. That's completely up to you. But what I try to do is eliminate these weird scenarios where a coach like vanishes from the earth. And for instance, like if a coach is hired from the NFL or something like that, that's going to be an eligible team because they're not already in the game. Where it starts to get a little weird is like if a team actually hired, say like, Florida's coordinator or something like this in real life, and say like Florida's coordinator is now coaching Eastern Michigan. Well, if you took over Eastern Michigan, suddenly that coordinator vanishes. He's not back on Florida and so on. And so it's just kind of a weird situation that I try to avoid. You're still going to be picking a team with a new head coach. All of these will be new head coaches this year, but they will come from a place where the coach won't just vanish on you. The first team on our list, and it's going to be a good one for those of you who love rebuilds, is the Central Michigan Chippewas. They had their coach, Jim McElwain, retired, and they replaced him with Army's offensive line coach from last year, Matt Drinkle. So this is a team that would be eligible by that because the coach would not disappear. The roster for Central Michigan is not great. You got some defensive players you can at least build around. Next up, another rebuild candidate, the Rice Owls. You get some Texas recruiting. That could be really nice. They hired in real life Scott Abel, who was the Davidson head coach. So again, did not exist in this college football world because it was at a different level of football. And so this would be an eligible team for you to choose. Rice's roster is pretty rough with only one player rated 80 or higher, and that's this monster of a defensive tackle who comes in at 341 pounds. Next up, another team in a recruiting hotbed, and that's Central Florida. The Knights hired Scott Frost in real life, but last year he was a senior analyst for the Los Angeles Rams, so that makes the Knights eligible for you, and they're an interesting team. They're already in a nice conference, pretty solid roster overall, and of course you get that Florida recruiting. Central Florida's roster, we start to see some decent players. We have 3 players here who are above an 85. They're all seniors, and 2 of them are running backs. But you also have this nice cornerback, Jaden Bellamy. Well, maybe you like the Florida recruiting, but you feel UCF's a little too good of a place to start. Well, what about the FIU Panthers, who in real life hired Willie Simmons, who was Duke's running backs coach? So making this team an eligible pick. They're a 1-star. Again, a lot of really fun options here. You could look to rebuild this program. FIU's talent isn't terrible, especially considering the conference they play and some of their opponents. You got some pieces you can build around, nice corner. Of course, you can run the ball, and a really nice pass-blocking left tackle. Maybe you're still wanting to do Owls, but not Rice. Instead, you could do the Kennesaw State Owls, who hired Jacksonville Jaguars running back coach Jerry Mack. That makes them eligible. Kennesaw State has a couple nice defenders, and more importantly, neither of them are seniors. Next is perhaps the hardest team to start a dynasty with in this list, and that's going to be the Ball State Cardinals. They ended up hiring the Butler head coach, and that's going to make this team eligible and a really big uphill battle. There's really not too much to say about the Ball State roster. You have a halfback who's somewhat decent, and you have a magician pure running quarterback, so maybe there's something you could do there. Maybe you want to take your talents out west and enjoy that California recruiting. The Fresno State Bulldogs could be your choice. Solid team overall, playing in the Mountain West. There could be a lot of movement with teams around the Pac-12 and Mountain West in the future, especially if you're open to kind of doing your own fictional setup. So there's a lot of fun options here with the Fresno State Bulldogs, who ended up hiring Matt Entz, who was the USC associate head coach and linebackers coach. So again, not a coordinator, not a head coach. That makes Fresno State an option. Fresno State has some nice players, including this 88 overall cornerback, a nice center, a couple running backs that I think could complement each other really nicely. You have a nice edge here with quick jump. You also have Kurt Warner's son at quarterback, EJ Warner. Or what about another Mountain West team, the New Mexico Lobos, who in real life hired Idaho head coach Jason Eck. Instead, maybe they're going to hire you. With New Mexico, I don't know, maybe you want to turn these guys into like halfback U, because they have some halfbacks here who are pretty decent, or at least the best players on the team, and quite a bit of depth at that position. Nice receiver to go along with it, and a guard that you could run behind. The Tulsa Golden Hurricane hired Trey Lamb from East Tennessee State, and this makes them eligible. Of course, they are not a Division I school that they plucked their head coach from, so maybe Tulsa's an option for you. Similar to New Mexico, Tulsa's got a handful of running backs you could use and a nice speed edge. Did Bill Belichick really come out of retirement? Maybe not in your own universe. The North Carolina Tar Heels. Of course, Bill Belichick was not in the college football world. He was not in the NFL world last year. North Carolina might be one of the best teams available on this list for you to consider. North Carolina might have one of the more complete rosters on this list, but they also play in one of the more difficult conferences on this list, so take that for what you will. But there's definitely some nice players that you could work with here. I don't know if they quite have any NFL talent just yet. I think in real life, probably that would pan out as some of these players start to grow and show some improvement and so on. But that's going to be up to you as well. So again, a really interesting option here. It really depends where you want to go with your dynasty. And depending what either happens to the Pac-12 in real life or what you decide to do with it in your own universe, the Washington State Cougars are an option as they hired South Dakota State head coach Jimmy Rogers. While Washington State might not have any bona fide superstars, their roster was deeper than I thought. And so you have some options on offense, you have some options on defense. So again, a good team that maybe gives you a base to really do what you want with this program. What about the Bowling Green Falcons, who hired college football legend Eddie George from Tennessee State to be their head coach? Maybe they go a different option and hire you instead. The Bowling Green roster, it's nothing to write home about, but it does have a bit of an identity with some of its best players being on the offensive line. So maybe this backfield creator quarterback is something you could work with as well. What about the Stanford Cardinal, who hired Frank Reich after his time with the Carolina Panthers? We're not saying Frank Reich's going to disappear, but maybe in your universe he takes a year off, works the broadcast angle, etc. Very, very common thing to do. The key is that he wouldn't just completely vanish. You would just replace him, and maybe he comes back in a year or so. The Stanford roster reminds me a little bit of the Washington State roster in that there's some depth, but maybe less here, but more top-end talent, such as cornerback Colin Wright. You have a decent tight end, a stable of running backs, and a couple defensive players who can at least get you through that first season as you start to build the program. Well, there you have it, guys. Whether you're picking a small program that's on the rebuild, you're picking a team that is well established and in an established conference, it's really up to you. I hope this list helps and it gives you some really nice options for you to go through and pick out where you're going to start your dynasty with college football 26. I'm Mike Lowe. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for liking the video. Thanks for leaving a comment, and I'll see you next time.